I think everybody has that inner, call it intuition,
Yep.
like whatever you want to call it, where anytime you make a choice, right? There's choice A and choice B. If choice A is correct, but that means you also have to like really face some hard truths that you might not be like mentally capable of doing right now or emotionally capable of doing, you're going to pick choice B, but you will know choice A was going to probably be the better answer. And I think
Right.
that's what I did when I started drinking again after that 5-month break is I picked choice B, but I knew in my heart like A would have been better.
Mm.
And I think that we do that all the time because, from an early age, we create these coping methods for whatever that is. It doesn't have to be drinking. It could be, sex validation, social media, whatever you want to pick your poison. But
Right.
we make these choices to kind of protect ourselves. And then until we're actually emotionally, mentally, physically able to make the other choice, we're still kind of stuck in that cycle of protecting ourselves, which can turn toxic pretty quickly if it's the
Yeah.
wrong thing.
Welcome to Amy Liz Harrison's podcast, Eternally Amy, a mum of 8's journey from jail to joy, a Gen Xer who overcame her struggle with alcohol to become a best-selling author and mental health advocate. She shares stories of hope and offers ideas for others struggling with mental health challenges. One thing is for sure, you'll leave with something to chew on. And now, here's your host, Amy Liz Harrison.
Well, greetings, compadres. I got a treat for you today. Yes, I do. A lot of you know that I am a sober curator, as well as some of the other things that I do with writing books. And so part of the joy of being a sober curator is you get to meet amazing people. And today I have Justin Lamb on, and he is one of those amazing people who I'm so excited to talk to because he just does a lot of incredible stuff. So I'm going to read a little intro for you. But I just, first of all, want to just throw in there, welcome, Justin. I'm really
Thanks.
excited.
Thanks. And we'll
Yay.
see if everyone agrees with you at the end of it.
I get that. No, but I'm so excited. So Justin is a grad student and a future therapist, and he's passionate about helping people find their light bulb moments. Who doesn't want that, right? And he's also helping people to inspire themselves and others. So he's currently hosting his 5th season of his podcast, which is called, wait for it, this is the coolest name, Friend Request. Yes, love it. It's an interview-based podcast with over 200 episodes. Justin is also sober and reviews non-alcoholic beers for the Sober Curator. And in case you didn't really know what the Sober Curator is, I sort of mentioned it and moved on. But it's an online lifestyle magazine for the sober and the sober curious. So when Justin's not studying, podcasting, or trying the latest non-alcoholic beer, you can find him hanging out with his wife, Erica, and their cat named Teddy. What? Love it.
Full
So,
name Theodore Whiskers Lamb, but we'll
oh my gosh, that's so good. All right, so good. I love animals that are like, they have a different name,
oh, yeah.
like, so it's like you have a pet iguana, but it's named Bear or
Yeah.
something. I'm a fan. I don't know. So anyway, Justin, welcome.
Thank you. And yeah, what's funny is we didn't know what to name the cat. And when we both first saw him, we're staring at his face for a second, and that is what Teddy came to mind. And my wife said, "Oh my God, that's exactly what his name is." And I said, "There it is." And there
So
we are.
good.
And I didn't even put it together at the moment that I was naming him after a stuffed bear, but hey, what are you going to do?
Oh, it's part of the charm.
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah. Well, Justin, I'm thrilled to have you on, and I was wondering if you might be okay with just sharing a little bit about your recovery story, just as much or as little as you would like.
Yeah, I'll make it as entertaining as possible. I grew up with an alcoholic father. Parents divorced, so I didn't see him much, but when I did see him, alcohol always played a role. In true contradictory fashion, which is a theme that ran through my younger life, I was like, I'm never going to drink. Just like I said, I never smoked cigarettes or weed or anything. You know, it's inevitably I would go back on all of those promises. And the end of high school, started drinking, and that quickly escalated. I was playing music, and that took me out to Los Angeles, and you know, alcohol and substances run rampant in your 20s in the music scene, and I dove into that head first and numbed a lot of stuff that I didn't really deal with until my mid 30s. I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease called sarcoidosis back in, I don't even know when now, probably like 6 years ago. And I had to go on an immunosuppressant that I wasn't allowed to drink on. And that was a real kick in the face because I was heavy into craft beers, and which is funny because a lot of people use that, I think, as an excuse to drink more. It's like, oh no, I'm like checking out the latest 14% barrel aged stout. And you're like, yeah, but it's 14, like you don't need that. You don't need to drink 6 of them for sure. And my habits were always very alarming with like hiding drinks and the wonderful 3 a.m. wake up where you're just shame spiraling and texting, or not texting, seeing who you texted, and just the wonderful things that come along with that. And so I quit drinking for 5 months so I could be on this drug. And the whole time I was stockpiling beers because before I reviewed non-alcoholic beers, I reviewed alcoholic beers. So I was literally finding limited edition 14% barrel aged stouts and stuff like that. And I was stockpiling them in the fridge for when I could drink again, because I had no intention of just keeping that going. And during that time, I gained a little clarity of thought, just because that's what happens when you remove alcohol, which is a fun fact that I feel like a lot of people don't understand, that even if you're a quote unquote normal drinker and you have, you know, I just drink on the weekends, or I have a glass of wine with dinner, whatever that looks like. Alcohol is a poison to your body. And so like it numbs you to some degree, no matter how much you drink. And so having that sort of clarity, which most people don't get unless you're a woman and you're pregnant and you don't drink for 9 months, but then that mixes with hormones and that's a whole other conversation. But it's really eye-opening. And I started having the conversation to myself inside my brain about like, oh, do I like need to quit drinking? But never externally. I was not ready to voice that to anyone else, really not even to myself at that point. And sure enough, as soon as I was off that medication, I opened and I remember the exact beer it was, and I drank it. And my wife was so excited for me because she knows I was like looking forward to trying these beers. And she didn't know that internally I was having this like struggle of, do I go back to drinking? And I felt so bad when I drank that first beer, because I think in my mind I had finally decided like, oh, you shouldn't drink. And I went right back into it. And as your listeners, everybody probably knows, like you kind of dive in where you left off, whether you've been sober for 6 months or 20 years, like you'll pick right back up where you left off. That's chemical. Pretty fun. And about 8 months later, I had to go back on the medication because my autoimmune levels and stuff all went up. And at that point, I'd made the decision. I was like, okay, if I'm going to get this opportunity again, because that's what it is. Like medically, I wasn't allowed to drink. And that restriction was the door that opened for me to not continue drinking. And so they said, you're going to go on this drug. So I kind of planned my sobriety, and that's a little unusual, especially because it worked. I know a lot of people plan like, oh, I'm just going to do this and then I'll quit drinking. But I really did. And it was a long time coming, because that whole lead up of not drinking for 5 months and then diving back in and then dealing with the fallout of that, and seeing that at that point I'd been in therapy for a couple of years, and all the work I was doing on myself would go out the window when I started drinking, and recognizing that pattern and like coming to terms with myself that I don't want to drink. But it's also something like, if I was just left to my own devices, I don't know if I could do that. But if someone's like, hey, you got to go on this drug, you can't drink on this drug. If you do, you're like, you might die because it's like a liver impacting drug. And I don't want to die. Like that was never on the table. So I was like, okay, I won't drink on that. And then when it came around the second time, I was like, I'm not going to keep drinking. But it was a wonderful, wonderful crutch that I've actually recommended to people that are like wanting to quit drinking, but don't know like how to deal with the social questions and the invasive privacy that people have about, oh, why are you not drinking? And I'll tell people, I'm like, tell them you're on a medication you're not allowed to drink on. And you can like slowly taper that excuse off. But I loved that. It was such a safety net for me to figure out how to approach those questions honestly once I was ready to. And that was 4.5 years ago. And haven't drank since. So it's fantastic. And it's taken a long time. And I want to just talk about the perspective shift that happens over time, because that I think has been the most eye-opening thing in the sober community. We can I swear on here? I don't know what the rules are.
Yeah.
I have a terrible mouth. I might have already. But
Yeah.
we can kind of like just shit on other people in early sobriety. You'll hear like quote unquote old timers being like, oh, that's just the pink cloud or whatever that looks like, instead of just like letting people figure it out. And I've been fortunate enough to, because I have the podcast, I'll record an episode every year about like how I feel about alcohol at my like anniversary date. And it has changed so much. And the amount of like non-alcoholic beers I drink has changed so much. And all that stuff just evolves over time. And I think sometimes we're ready to dive in head first and get to the end point. I want to be long-term sobriety. I want to be 10 plus years, or I just want to like remove alcohol and like it never happened and not deal with it. And I think the journey is so important in that step-by-step process of becoming sober, being sober, whether that's part of your identity or whatever that looks like. And that was a really long, rambly story.
No, it was so good. And first of all, congratulations on 4.5 years.
Thanks.
Amazing and awesome. And I mean, it sounds like, did you not go to treatment? You just kind of quit. Yeah, that's incredible. And, I believe like there are so many different ways to get sober. And I love that you tried it on for size because you kind of had to.
Yeah.
And then I love that you talked about like that inner voice kind of that was like, gosh, should I quit drinking? Should I maybe not go back to drinking when I'm done with this course? And, and then actually giving yourself the chance to get sober and remain so. And I love that because people, they fall into this in different ways. And it's not always the, traditional sort of rock bottom moment. And, and so I love that you shared that. I think it's important to tell these stories. And
I think I was just gonna say, I think a lot of people, or I think everybody has that inner, call it intuition, or like whatever you want to call it, where anytime you make a choice, right? There's choice A and choice B. If choice A is correct, but that means you also have to like really face some hard truths that you might not be like mentally capable of doing right now or emotionally capable of doing, you're going to pick choice B, but you will know choice A was going to probably be the better answer. And I think that's what I did when I started drinking again after that 5-month break, is I picked choice B, but I knew in my heart like A would have been better. And I think that we do that all the time because, from an early age, we create these coping methods for whatever that is. It doesn't have to be drinking. It could be, sex, validation, social media, whatever you want to pick your poison. But we make these choices to kind of protect ourselves. And then until we're actually emotionally, mentally, physically able to make the other choice, we're still kind of stuck in that cycle of protecting ourselves, which can turn toxic pretty quickly if it's the wrong thing. So,
yeah, absolutely. And so when you got sober, what did you do? Did you have support of any kind? Did you do 12-step? Did you do, no, I'm just going to not drink anymore and kind of see how my life unfolds and make choices that serve me better?
So I did non-alcoholic beers. That was my coping method. That and that the social crutch of saying I was on medication was a huge safety net because you don't have to have any conversations, right? It's there. That's like full stop there. some people are definitely going to be invasive and be like, oh, for what? Like, what's going on with you? And you're like, what? Such a strange violation that people
Have you
feel.
heard of HIPAA?
Yeah. Oh my God. It's so strange to me. Regardless, I had that for the like social aspect. So I didn't really have to admit anything to anyone else, especially since I wasn't really admitting anything to myself yet.
Sure.
And then the non-alcoholic beers was quenching that, and like candy. My brother is sober as well, a little before me. I think he's probably got like a year and a half on me. Both of us are candy fiends ever since then, because he replaced that sugar from the alcohol, and you either taper that off eventually, or you just lean in and have a bag of gummies conveniently near you at all times. But I think honestly, the biggest thing that allowed me to get sober without doing a program or anything like that was I was actively in therapy. I had that as a support system.
Yeah.
I had done a lot of work on myself that people typically don't even begin to dive into until they've been sober for a little while. During COVID, I ran a lot of sober groups like on Clubhouse and stuff like that. And the most common thing that I hear that is wildly frustrating, as someone like going into the mental health field, I have a lot of people like, are you going to do addictions? I was like, I don't know. Like, as an addict, I can tell you, we are very frustrating people.
Yeah.
But I hear people constantly in those groups, they quit drinking, right? And that would quit drinking, full stop. They didn't quit drinking and then try to figure out like, why was I drinking to begin with? What was I numbing all those years? What have I not dealt with for the past 2 decades that I had, like, isn't even in the front of my mind at this point? And so those people like tend to relapse more, and those people tend to just be like, what is it called? A dry drunk, right? Like where you just don't drink, but you're still angry and every day is hard, and you're not addressing any of the underlying stuff. And so I had the advantage of already working on that stuff. Like I said, I was getting to a really great point where I was able to recognize the progress I'd made, like as a person and my personal growth, and also recognize when I threw it out the window 2 drinks in. So that was a huge red flag for me, as well as many others that I checked. And I think it's so important to point that out, because I've helped a lot of people quit drinking in the last 4 years, because I'm very vocal and open, and the non-alcoholic beer stuff is a huge segue to that conversation with people. But a lot of people have the same impression that most non-sober people do, which is like, you have to hit some dramatic terrible bottom, like you have to kill someone with your car, end up in the hospital or do something terrible to get to the point where you're like, I need to quit drinking. It's like, you don't have to do that. Like, first of all, if you drink problematically, you probably have plenty of stories you feel really shitty about. You don't need to get to the shittiest one in order to quit drinking. And that's how I feel. Like, I did plenty of shit that I'm really not proud of at all when I was drinking, but I didn't like get to a point where I would call anything a bottom. I think that's important to point out, because there's a lot of people out there that check a lot of boxes for problematic drinking, for like textbook alcohol use disorder, but they haven't woken up and chugged a bottle of vodka, so they can't be like, no, it's not that. It's individual for each person, and it doesn't have to be worst case scenario for you to cut something out of your life that is literally poison anyway. And that's like really close to me getting on a soapbox about how I feel about alcohol in general, but I think you get the point.
I totally do. And, I love it, because ultimately, and this is just my opinion, but it's like, I had to get sober ultimately for myself. Did I have my husband on my back? Yes. Then did I later have the law on my back? Yes. But I knew that if I didn't do it for myself, it wasn't going to stick. Like, I had to come to terms with that. I couldn't get sober for somebody else. And so I love that, you were doing inner work and you were able to figure that out. And, I think that's such a key component of it, is that, when we get sick and tired of the consequences, or we just realize the cognitive dissonance in the whole thing, and like, yeah, this isn't adding up with my life anymore. It's just not working for whatever reason.
I think a commonality probably with anyone who's quit drinking, and then anyone who might have a problem with drinking, or like think they have a problem with drinking, is shame, which is
Yes.
probably the most unpleasant feeling you can
Yes.
have as a human. And what do we do with that when it's uncomfortable? We bottle it up
Yep.
and push it aside, or have another drink to not think about it, or whatever that looks like. It's miraculous what we can forget about in 3 hours. And I mean that like personal narrative, but I think it applies to a lot of people, is that 3 a.m., you wake up because that's what alcohol does to you as your body's processing it. You wake up 3 a.m. for whatever reason, and you do the shame spiraling.
Yep.
And then you wake up at like 6:30 or 7, do your go to work, do your day, and you just forget that terrible, terrible moment at 3 a.m. and
Yes.
inevitably get there again. And it's crazy that we just, I mean, naturally, I did the same thing. I don't know I don't have an answer for why that is, but
Mhm.
we just forget how terrible that feels, it seems like, every single time.
Mhm.
And so we just keep numbing and numbing, and that cycle will destroy you.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay, so I love also the whole non-alcoholic beers, because I think that there's sometimes this perception that like, oh my gosh, if I get sober, I can't do anything that I used to do. All my fun is going to be gone, and whatever the narratives are at the time. And I remember when I got sober, I remember that like 4 o'clock in the afternoon would come, and toward the end, I had already been drinking all day. But prior to that, when I was kind of, quote, drinking normally, unquote, that was kind of the beginning of cocktail hour. And so I had all these wine glasses, right? And so when I got sober, I would put my sparkling water and a lime in the wine glass. And there were some people, well-intentioned people, in my life at that time who were really negative about me using a wine glass for my sparkling water. And what's so funny looking back to me now is that, I mean, I knew exactly what I was doing. And what I was trying to do was I just couldn't have too many changes all at once.
Yeah.
I still wanted to drink out of those glasses. And it was something that was strangely comforting to me at that time, even though
Absolutely.
I was drinking something that was non-alcoholic. And there were some people who were like, oh, you're going to associate, that wine glass with wine. And then you're going to, it's a slippery slope. You're just going to start pouring wine into it. And I didn't. So,
Yeah.
it's interesting that everybody, even in those early days, I knew that, I was, and still I'm not today, I'm not kind of any sobriety expert, but I knew that that was something that I just needed to do for me. It's like telling someone who smokes, you got to quit smoking and drinking at the same time. It's just too much.
Yeah.
And so, and I too was just candy all the time, everywhere.
Yeah.
And there's something about some of those parts of those rituals of drinking that, you know what? Hey, how about like get off my back because I'm not drinking. So like,
Yeah.
isn't that enough? And you just want to say that like,
Well, that's
so
when I think about the medication thing too. It's
yeah,
when I say crutch, I want to clarify, like, I think of that as kind of a healthy word in a way, because like you get injured, right? You need a little crutch. I gotta use a crutch until I get better and I can like walk without it. And so that's what the medication is. That's what the non-alcoholic beer is. That's what drinking sparkling water out of the wine glass is. It's
yeah,
just this crutch to help you get to fully healed and able to walk without it,
absolutely. And so now you're in grad school to become a therapist. Tell me about that. How's it going?
That's a longer story. It's going really well. I constantly have to, I was about to say I have to stop second guessing myself. I guess I don't have to second guess myself. I have to stop second guessing myself. Every time I get concerned about, oh, am I going to be good at this? Am I good at this? Like questioning my skills, and I'm nearing the end of the program, and I am through, whether it be like a class activity or actually like doing therapy with somebody, I am shown time and time again that like, oh, you're really great at this. Like this is a natural ability that you have now that you've like developed over however many years. And I have to keep coming back to that.
Mm.
And remembering how like it sounds conceited, but like how great I am at it. And it's taken me most of my life to think that way about myself, which is why I feel a little okay about saying it right now, even though inside I'm like, "Ooh, you sounded like a dick." I feel really confident about it, and I feel for the first time about anything in my life well deserved in that confidence. So it's going really well, but it started in the weirdest way, which was the podcast that I do, where I just was interviewing people specifically about trauma and overcoming like really big events in their lives. And within a few interviews, I was like, oh, I'm doing little mini therapy sessions. That's cool. And I was using a lot of the skills that I learned in my own therapy, like, because at that point, I think I'd been in therapy for like 5 years. And I realized I was taking some of the same skills that I was just picking up on my therapist doing, whether that be reflecting back, feelings or trying to get you to dig deep or whatever that looks like. At that time, though, this is my favorite part of this story because it ends well, is I in no way thought that I could do that. Not that I was like mentally incapable, like the education thing wasn't like intimidating. There was part of me that was like, you don't deserve to go to a master's program. You don't you are unworthy of that accomplishment. And so I went back to community college where I'd already gotten 2 associate's degrees, because I was like, I'm never going to a university. What's the point? I started a mental health program at community college. And after the one semester there, I was like, I can do this. I am like good enough. And even if I'm not, I'm going to figure it out when I'm there, because I'm going to do it. And then I enrolled at Oakland University in Rochester, Michigan, and I got my undergrad, which I hadn't gotten till then. The next semester, I started the master's program, and that was last fall, and I'll be done with all my practicum, internship, and licensing this time next year, going quicker through the program than anyone else I'm in the program with. So and then on top of working full time and the podcast and all my other activities that all bleed from some form of ADHD. But it's been the best decision I've ever made. I've had a lot of passions in my life, whether that be music or some random creative project that I like, woodworking, that I really got into for a while, but nothing I could like make a living off of, make money off of, make into a career. And this was the first time I was like, oh, I could do that. And the difference with this, as opposed to everything I just named and many, many, many other hobbies, many you can probably see behind me, is that that interest, that desire has not waned at all. And usually that stuff fades away eventually, and I'm left with a project 90% done and a lot of expenses on random crap.
Okay, I have to just interject and tell you I'm the same way, which is this is the perfect segue into talking about ADHD, because I can't tell you the equipment that I have that was, like it's gone to die in a project graveyard. I mean, I got hot glue guns. I have a laminator.
I got my Cricut down there, sewing machine over here.
Right. In case I need to emboss something, I have that. Like, what? It's insane. So we share that in common. We have ADHD. Can you talk to us a little bit about, how you were diagnosed and how you even maybe thought you might have it?
Yeah. That actually was super frustrating. As I said, like a number of times already, I'd been in therapy for a number of years up until, well, I mean, I'm still in therapy, but at the point when I got the insinuation that I might have ADHD, I was talking to it was my second therapist, and she started asking me a lot of like random questions, seemingly off topic from what we were talking about. Like, do you have a lot of like unfinished projects? And do you find and it's just like asking me all these questions that I was like, yes, and at the end, she's like, well, just so you know, like you check pretty much all the boxes for ADHD. And she's like, you don't have to do anything about it necessarily. Like you're 38, you live a functional life. But, if you want to like have that, like now you have that knowledge in case you pursue anything with that. And that really like stuck in my brain. And I wanted to see if like the medication route was right for me. And I was really iffy about that because I know like now that weed's legal everywhere, Adderall seems to be the like most, abused, sold underground whatever stuff, and there's a lot of stigma around it. And but I was like, I want to see if it does anything. And so I have friends that abuse it, and they use it to like stay up, and they get jittery and all that wonderful stuff. And so I was weary about that, especially like, addict brain. And
Mm.
I decided I would like still give it a try, but like the lowest dose you can get. And so I did that, and then I was able to like accomplish a thing. I was able to like sit down and do a thing from
Yeah.
start to finish. And I didn't get any sort of jittery, like not even like cup of coffee type of jitters. And I told that to my therapist, and she's like, yeah, that probably means that it's correct for you.
Right.
I was like, well, shit. Then I had the overwhelming task of getting over the stigma associated with it, and
Uh,
not externally, but internally,
sure.
because I had always, so I have like a childhood history with mental health medication where, the 90s were crazy and they were trying all sorts of stuff. So I like, there was a period I was on Prozac. There was
Hmm.
a period, my mom and I both say this is true, and every doctor I talk to goes, I don't think anyone would do that to you. And I was like, I'm pretty sure it happened, but that I was on Prozac and Ritalin at the same time, which is a big
Oh,
no-no, I guess.
yeah.
Um,
Oh, my
and
word.
and Prozac messed me up pretty bad when I was a kid. And I wrote a paper about it in my high school psych class. It was stupid, but
Mm.
I had a lot of stigma around taking mental health meds, and not about mental health meds. Like going into this field, I'm not someone that's like anti psychotropic medicine by any means whatsoever. Like the stance I always had was like, some people like this is how they can function in day-to-day life. And I just was like, but not me. Like, but I don't need that. Accepting that there was a medication that was helping me function on a
Mm.
level that most people would consider normal.
Right.
It was a really, no pun intended, hard pill to swallow. And it took a long time. I did an episode about ADHD, and I ended up crying on the episode because it's just like it was such an impactful thing. Like the struggle that I dealt with for the majority of my life, that I didn't even know was something that could be like fixed. And I know fixed is probably a frowned upon word, but like everything was just a little bit easier. And
Hmm.
I was like, what? And it's really, it's hard to accept. And because to me, it's not a long-term solution, because it's kind of medication that like your tolerance builds up. So you just have to take more and more and more. And
Mm.
which is not really something I want to do. And there's other methods for managing a lot of those symptoms, but it was difficult to get to the like point I'm at now where I'm like, I take this and it works really well.
Mhm.
And I still feel the stigma, especially there's an Adderall shortage for the last year. And
Yeah.
anytime you had to get the prescription, like you have pharmacists look at you like you're, I don't know, like a 22-year-old drug pusher, like you're going to go sell to high school kids or something. You're like, no, I
Mm.
just need this. I need my 10 milligrams.
Right.
Um, so that part's still difficult, but getting the the clarity and functioning, the ability to like finish something that I start. And that sounds very general, but like right now, if you were to ask me to make a list of everything that's 99% done that I have,
Mm.
I could make you a very long list. My wife could probably make a longer one, of projects that I have not finished around the house. But all of a sudden that like wasn't an issue. And that was huge. And the ability to like focus on what I'm doing and like read a fucking book
Mm.
without reading the same paragraph 9 times because I was thinking about something else. It's just absolutely remarkable. And then I thought, this year, since I'm going into this field, I should probably get like properly diagnosed. So I like went to an ADHD specialist and did the entire like full battery of tests, where my wife had to fill out tests too as like an observer,
Mm.
and got my like official diagnosis. So yeah, I am that guy now.
Well, I love it because similar to what you just shared. I mean, I too am on medication for ADHD, and I found it so empowering to finally have a name for something that I had dealt with for so long. And I don't know, did you have the narrative in your head growing up, like, I'm dumb, everybody else gets all this, and they understand it better than I do, faster than I do, or how did it show up for you as a kid?
As a kid, that's tough to nail down. The other part of that story is like I mean, I guess in no uncertain terms, I hated myself for the first 37 years of my life, and had that realization back in 2020. And so as a kid, I mean, my life was dedicated to getting validation from other people.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, if you go back, you can certainly check all the kid ADHD boxes. Like I was the class clown. I
Mm-hmm.
did very poorly in school. Could not pay attention. Always just trying to, be the entertainer and make the joke. And that's how that showed up for me. And it's hard for me to put it in that box because like I recognize it so much as a validation piece,
Mm-hmm.
but I mean, both are true.
Mm-hmm. Sure. And, I think that at least for me, sometimes, I would just sort of think, I don't know, it doesn't seem like anybody else kind of struggles with this stuff that I'm struggling with. Like, I remember thinking that, like, why can't it's like such a struggle to make my bed in the morning, and other people are like, oh, I can't leave the house without making my bed, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like, what's wrong with you? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then I realized there were far more people like that than people like me.
Yeah.
And it just kind of was like this, a total head scratcher, really, that, oh, okay. So, this stuff actually, it has a name. It doesn't make me a weirdo, although I had sort of put that label on myself anyway, a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think that it's just empowering and it's freedom. Once you get that diagnosis, it's kind of like, okay, all right. So now it makes sense. It's kind of
Yeah.
like going from a black and white TV to a color TV. Like, got this
And
now.
on that same metaphor, I have to tell you, I had a moment when I first started taking medication where I was in my car. I'd taken medicine and then left. I had a dentist appointment and I was driving to the dentist, and a song came on, and I was kind of digging. Like I said, I play guitar. I'm a musician, and I was kind of digging the beginning of the song. I hadn't heard it before, and I was really picking up on like, oh, here's where the second guitar is coming in, and then here's the bass, and I was able to like pick out all the instrumentation and be like, oh, this was mixed really well. Like this is really cool. And then I was like, wait, that doesn't. Why am I? There's no way this is like mixed better than anything I've ever heard before. So then I put on like an old Counting Crows song that I knew
Mhm.
a billion times. And all of a sudden I could pick out the instrumentation in that easier too. And my
Hmm.
entire life playing with other musicians, I never understood how someone could listen to a song, like not any song, but most songs, and so easily pull out like the bass line, be like, oh, the bass is doing this, or pull out
Hmm.
the guitar line. And all of a sudden, and I don't know if this is directly related, but it's the only thing that makes any sense. All of a sudden, since then, I can pick out these parts and songs in like a clear way that I'd never been able to do before, because
That's awesome.
I heard it like as a whole. And I called my buddy who I'd played music with for years, and I was just crying because I was like, I felt like I was hearing. It's a dramatic statement to say I was hearing music for the first time, because that's not what it was, but like
Right.
in a little way it was. And
Yeah.
it really, it blew my mind. And like little moments like that would happen the first 6 months I was on medication, where I was just like what the fuck, like the,
Yeah.
and to say, like, to speak what you said to earlier, I didn't I didn't think, and this goes to the like self-hate, but like I didn't think, why is this easier for everyone else? I would think like, why is everything so hard for me?
Mm.
Um, and then I would just like, oh, I probably deserve it or whatever, like I probably
Hmm.
fucked up. Like it's probably all my fault.
Hmm.
Um, And I would develop tools to fix that. Like I have an app on my phone that I've had for years now that my life depends on this app. Like I have alerts for when I have to take my autoimmune medication. I have alerts for when I have to clean the bathrooms. I have alerts for I like literally anything that I have to do that's not just a regular weekly occurrence like a class or something or my work, my job or something. I have to put in this thing because it goes off and I can snooze it, but I can't mark it done until, well, that's my own rule, but I can't mark it done until I do it. And after seeing the ADHD doctor, I found out like that's a really great tool for people with
Yes.
ADHD. And I incorporated it into my life because I needed something like that to function.
Yeah.
And now I have a reason why I needed something like that to function. And it's so stuff like that is just wild. The tools that we will implicate, that might not be the right word, employ to get through our day-to-day lives, depending on like when you get diagnosed and when you finally are able to address it. It blows my mind.
Yeah, I love that because it's like, you can pick up all these different coping kind of skills, but did I hear you say this? I don't know if I heard this correctly. Did you develop this app yourself?
No.
Okay.
No, I got it completely randomly. Starbucks used to do little app cards when iPhones were new, and you get like a free app. And
Yeah.
it was one of those that I still have. And God, I hope they never stop like making it or supporting it because it so important to my day-to-day life.
That is amazing.
Yeah. It's
But I love
completely
that. I
random.
love that, because that's the thing. I mean, reaching out and trying to, seek out things that are actually going to work and that will add to your experience, with whatever it is that you're facing.
Yeah.
That's huge, and so that's fantastic. I love it so much. And another big tool I'm a fan of is do you do the, I think it's called the Pomodoro method, technically, but it's that one where you give yourself, a certain amount of time. Like if you're in school, right, and you're taking 7 subjects. So every subject, you give it 15 minutes a day, 40 minutes a day, whatever. And then the timer goes off and you go to the next one. And I love that.
I do. I have a I have a detailed block schedule that I try to
Okay.
stick to for my day-to-day throughout the week. Like it'll be, like read chapter 3 and take notes from 12:30 to 2:30 and I'm pretty good about sticking to my own rules as far as that stuff goes. But that's just a really helpful way for me to actually do the stuff I need to do and have the correct amount of time set aside to do it. And I like leave myself buffers in case I underestimate that time.
Yeah, absolutely. So smart. I love it. Yeah, the timer app on my phone too. I use that a lot if I'm out to coffee with somebody or something and I'm like, I don't want to be checking the time every 5 minutes. So let me just set this alarm so I know when I have to leave. So then I can be fully present, and yeah,
Absolutely.
so helpful. Do you think for you that your drinking habits and your ADHD were at all connected, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, I think a lot of the any drinking substance, even just like terrible decisions, whether it be my 20s were crazy, acting out sexually, like all of this can be traced back for me. Like the commonality with a lot of it is boredom.
Mm,
And I would get bored because I would just either run out of things to do or traditional ADHD brain, I would like get bored with whatever I was doing. I would just lose interest in whatever was keeping me interested in. And so then I would look for the next thing. And a lot of times, tying into my whole narrative of validation, it would be where could I get that validation from? And if I was just alone, alcohol does the trick.
mhm.
So that
Yeah.
was the next thing. And alcohol plus ADHD gave me a billion more projects that were abandoned because I would get drunk and
Yes.
have an idea for some. I mean, that's how I started my first podcast. It was about craft beer and 90s pop culture, and I recorded the episode after watching Empire Records, and I was drunk one night, And I was like, yeah, this is a great idea. And then I felt like I had to stick to it. And then it became something I was, I'd get like 50 downloads an episode and be like, I have to do this. If I don't, these people will,
Totally.
yeah.
Oh
And
my gosh.
many drunken projects that
The
exactly what would have
graveyard.
been. So yeah.
Yeah, totally. It's so true. The worst though for me was when I couldn't remember what the project was or the
Oh,
idea, right? The next day I'd be like, shoot. So then I started leaving like, little breadcrumbs, little Columbo kind of like post-it notes around the kitchen. Like,
yeah.
what was I thinking about? Who was that book character I was gonna write the book on again?
You're like
Like
Memento, you got tattoos all over your body to figure out what.
totally. And then like 9 times out of 10, I'd look back and I'd be like, this was a terrible idea. Like, what
Yeah.
was, it's just
Yeah.
like not what it seemed to be the previous evening.
Oh yeah. Mine were always too big.
Yeah.
Maybe like, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna get my buddies together. We're gonna start a band, but then I'm gonna open the venue and we're gonna. It's like, what? You're not gonna do that.
Right.
Ugh.
Or
Yeah.
it'll just work out. It's not that hard. We know someone who knows someone. It'll be fine. That
Yeah.
part, that'll just work out.
Oh, and then the hyper focus will
Yes.
cause you to do so much research where you really are like partially an expert on that thing and you are very sure about it. And then you lose interest and then it doesn't really matter. Like I know so much about so many things that don't fucking matter to me at all. It's
Right.
ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I get that. And I want to know too, okay, so how did your podcast start? I mean, how did you, so, you get sober and did it just kind of, was it a dream of yours or how did you start that up?
So I quit drinking in June of 2019. And I was doing, like I said, I was doing a craft beer and 90s pop culture podcast. And
Mhm.
I enjoyed the podcast aspect. Because I even on that, I would have people on my show and instead of talking about ourselves, we would talk about Dawson's Creek while we drank an IPA. And I
Love.
liked I liked doing that part of it. So when I quit drinking, it was like, what can I do? And I started first, I was like, kept it going, I was doing non-alcoholic beers, but I lost my ADHD. I lost the interest in it really. And I was like, what can I do that's like I don't know, I could still talk to people. And
Mhm.
I had an idea. I was on Facebook one day and I was like looking at different comments and stuff. And there's people, I assume you have this too. I assume everyone has this, right? That's my therapy thing. I would always do and be like, like everybody. And my therapist would be like, not like everybody. I'm like, okay. Um,
Oh,
but
right.
there's people that, especially Facebook, where you just have these like Facebook friends, right? And you knew each other in person at some point, like maybe you went to school together or worked together at a restaurant, whatever that looks like. And now it's 10, 15 years later and you guys comment back and forth on pictures or whatever that looks like. But like, that's the extent of your relationship.
Mhm.
And so I asked the question, like, how well do I, like, who are these people, right?
Mhm.
Like, who's this chick that I worked with at Longhorn Steakhouse in 2003? Like, who is now, she has 2 kids. I think she's been divorced. Like, who is this person?
I love it.
And that idea is what started the podcast. And you mentioned the name. I have to say, I'm proud of the name too, because someone tried to steal it and now I have it trademarked. So
Good for you.
yeah, someone started a podcast called Friend Request where they interview their Facebook friends. And this was like during my 3rd season. I was like, hi.
You're like, nope.
Yeah. They wouldn't stop it. So I had to do cease and desist letters and then I got it trademarked and I was like, now it is mine. Um,
Good for you.
yeah, it's very funny. But that's how it started. And I mean, it didn't take long. I was very fortunate to just have some people right at the beginning that were not shy about being vulnerable and sharing some really intimate details about their lives.
Mhm.
And that's where it all started. And that's what put me where I'm at today.
Well, I love it. And also, here's what else I love. So, something that connects you and me and Elise. And so Elise is the founder and the CEO of Sober Curator, which we've mentioned, but is our obsession for all things 90s, 80s kind of thing. And I'm just wondering, because I'm going through a season right now where I am sharing some of the gems from that time period with my kids. And so we've watched a lot of old shows. Some would call them old shows. I'd call them like shows I feel like I watched 5 years ago, but really it was more like 35 years ago, but who's counting? And so I'm wondering, like, what shows from that time period? You did mention Dawson's Creek, big fan. What shows were you into? Were you like, into Knight Rider and all that? Or were you
Knight Rider was my brother more than me, because he's 3 years older. Honestly, like, I relate so much to TV and movies from my childhood, because I feel like that's where I found a lot of my like solace and time and imagination. Lived there, and I would come home from school, and single mom, so she was working, and I would watch TV until she got home. And so when I think of it, it's like Growing Pains and Saved by the Bell and Who's the Boss. Your Friday night lineup with like Full House and Family Matters and Step by Step. Like that's all the stuff that like late 80s, early 90s, and then even like early 90s, mid 90s sitcoms, because that was like the time I did spend with my mom, was like watching TV at night. So whether that be like Friends or Frasier or like anything on NBC. And there's shows that I watch where I'm like, why was I watching this? Because perfect example, Moonlighting. Did you watch Moonlighting? Bruce Willis.
Massive Moonlighting fan right here.
So quick fun story. I bought the DVD of the first and second season because I told my wife, I was like, I want you to watch this, and I want to watch it because I want to see if it like sparks any memories. Because I know I watched it, and the reason I said like, why was I watching this? Because I was born in '83, so I was watching that at like 5-6 years old.
Okay, all right.
It's like, why was I watching this show?
I love
Very
it.
strange. But literally a week after the DVD gets here, I go on eBay and like look it up because it's not on streaming platforms anywhere. And I get the DVDs and they arrive, and my wife just comes into the kitchen with her phone and she's cracking up. I was like, oh, what? Like, I figure she's watching Instagram or something.
Yeah.
And she shows me, and it's an article that says Moonlighting now available on Hulu. And I was like, no, I just bought the DVDs. Like, what am I going to do with DVDs?
Right.
But there's a lot of shows I watched with my mom in the 90s and 80s that like when it comes up, other people are always like, you watched that with your mom? And as a child, like Melrose Place and 90210. And it's I never really thought about it, but probably not great for a 7-8-year-old
Well, I feel like a lot of that stuff went over my head anyway. At the time, there were reasons why I liked some of those shows. And then later on, like watching them, I'm like, dang, this was kind of inappropriate for a kid back then, or, just kind of, but I didn't know. So we had a friend down the street who quote unquote, taped every Tuesday night when Moonlighting was on, he would tape it. And so we had this huge collection of VHS tapes of all the Moonlighting episodes. And so I remember just watching those, borrowing the tapes. Pretty soon, like they did that kind of, you would call it pixelated today, but whatever it was that kind of made the tape sort of begin to be on its last legs back then.
Because it's physical tape. And the more you play it, it's just running it out.
Yes. Yes. Well, so I know funny. It is. It's funny. And I tried to, some of the things I've tried to get my kids into, like, for a while, I was like, let's watch Mr. Rogers. They were like, they turned to me 10 minutes. They're like, this is boring. Like, they're not.
Mr. Rogers is much too slow paced for kids of this generation. You got quick cuts.
Right. Totally. So they're definitely like more into the sitcoms, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But and then Yeah. The one thing that I wanted to make sure that I asked you also is like, gosh, so in a year, you will have finished your grad work. You'll be, on to the next stuff. And
Yeah.
so do you plan on having a private practice or what's next?
Yeah, the goal is definitely a private practice. There's some weird gray area of like, I don't want to say easiest because I don't think any of it's like easy per se, but if I were to go, so the boring stuff, when you graduate, you can get your limited license. And that just means you're practicing under the supervision of a fully licensed therapist.
Okay.
And you have to get 3,000 hours in no less than 2 years. You're typically a limited licensed counselor for 2 years. In that time, it is much easier, there's that word again, to get the hours if you're at like a clinic where, there's a bunch of therapists and a bunch of people are coming there. So they're assigning you clients constantly. Even easier if you go to an actual like inpatient facility, because then you just, there's your 40 hours a week right there because you're there. Whereas private practice, like if you go right into that and you can, as a limited licensed therapist, you can open your own practice and you still have your supervisor that you meet with. But then you're running your own business essentially. You can do that, but you have to build your clientele up, and that can take time. Depending on how like the internship goes before you start that. There's absolutely success stories where people have clients they were seeing in their internship, follow them to their private practice, and then you just keep going from there. And I do have a leg up on it where I've kind of been in this world for a little while now between the podcast and networking, and like I have therapists regularly on my podcast. I have for the last 4 years. So my name is already synonymous with therapist to a lot of people. I have people reach out to me on Facebook and Instagram all the time, and either asking me to be their therapist, and I have to tell them I'm not that person yet, or asking me like how they can find a therapist and stuff like that. So I do think it'll be a little easier for me to build a clientele than someone just throwing themselves into it. But it comes with its own stigma, but that is the ultimate goal is, in a perfect world, I would have a little like thrift store on the ground level and office upstairs where I could see clients. And then I could still have a hobby where I'm like flipping storage units or something and running a little thrift store. But that's an
Love it.
imaginary world where there's 9 days in a week, I think. So we'll see if that's actually possible.
Right. But it sounds like, that sounds like a pretty good sitcom to me.
Oh, so there you
And,
go. Yeah.
like a Jason Seaver from Growing Pains, if he had a thrift store,
Oh yeah.
I mean,
Love me some Alan Thicke. Yeah.
yes, best of all worlds. Oh my gosh. Well, okay. So Justin, as we wrap up, I just want to thank you so much, first of all, for sharing your story. And also for sharing all of the, details about, I think it's just people just, it's so hard still sometimes to push for that diagnosis or to put yourself out there and, be like, yeah, something's not right here. And I love that you shared all the things that you shared, because I think it just helps people go, oh, well, that's interesting. Maybe I should get tested, or, oh, that's interesting. Maybe I should get a professional's thoughts on this behavior. And so thank you for that. And also, as we kind of close up, I just wanted to thank you. One thing that you said I wrote it down and I was like, yeah, like truer words were never spoken. It was back when at the beginning of the interview, when we were talking about crutches, you had mentioned a crutch, and you had mentioned, we were talking about medication, and we were talking about ADHD meds, and how a crutch is there to help you. It is there to assist you with what the problem is, right? And I have broken my leg before, and I can tell you right now, if I hadn't have had a pair of crutches, I don't really know how I would have functioned, especially during that time of acute, what am I going to do? Like crawl on the floor kind of thing. And so I just had never heard anybody word it quite as well. And I'm paraphrasing. You said it
Yeah.
a lot more eloquently than I did right then. But it's true, is that people use the word crutch and they use it in a negative way.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you're going to use a crutch or whatever, or whatever is considered a crutch. And it's like, crutches do a lot of good,
Yeah.
and I want to thank you for saying it in that way. I hadn't seen it like that before, because I think my tendency is to, hear people, oh yeah, it's so negative, and then I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's negative.
Yeah, I think people think of the word crutch and they think of like a Charles Dickens Tiny Tim, like that's
Right.
your whole life. You're going to have that crutch. And it's like, I think of it like you said, like I broke my leg and I'm going to need this until I can walk
Yeah.
myself.
Absolutely. Such a crucial help, impermanently or not, but I mean, it's crucial, it's vital. And so thank you for bringing that up. And I just want to say how much I've enjoyed getting to know you on here, and I wish you all the best. I'm just
Same.
excited for your journey.
Yeah, it's been a fun conversation. I appreciate you taking the time.
Of course.
Really great.
So on that note, if you are listening or watching, make sure you check Justin out. What's the easiest and best way to get a hold of all your stuff?
Ooh. All socials are either Justin Lamb Music, all one word, or Friend Request Pod. You can real simple. They're all real words.
Love it. I mean, they're not fancy spelling or like
Yeah.
a bunch of hyphens or something.
All exactly how it sounds. Yeah.
So good. All right, Justin. Well, thank you so very much. And if you are listening, just remember to be kind, rewind, take what you like, and leave the rest behind.
Thank you so much for listening to Eternally Amy, a mum of eight's journey from jail to joy. Amy Liz Harrison is a best-selling author, speaker, 12-step coach, meditation teacher, and recovery advocate. To find out more, please visit amylizharrison.com. You can keep up with Amy on all platforms by following @AmyLizHarrison. Please subscribe and review this podcast. It means so much to us if you do.